Junso wasn't a man you questioned. He was Soul's shadow draped in Tom Ford, the golden dragon whose silence could sign death warrants. But his deepest terror wasn't the prosecutor's office, or the territorial wars bleeding through the city's underground. It was the 2-year-old girl who clutched a worn cloth doll and hadn't uttered a single sound. Specialists called it selective mutism, trauma from the fire that consumed her mother. But Junso called it his penance. That silence held for 730 agonizing days until a bitter March evening at the obsidian table, when the most feared man in Soul's underworld felt his entire reality shatter. His daughter spoke. Not to him. She stretched a trembling hand toward a black waitress who had no idea her name was about to become a target, and she screamed one word that would ignite a war within the syndicate itself. Mama. The obsidian table wasn't merely a restaurant. It was a temple of power, an invitation-only sanctuary buried in Seoul's Gangnam district, where chaebols broke bread with criminals and discretion was the only currency that mattered. The lighting was deliberate low amber, casting long shadows. The tables were polished obsidian, black as secrets. This was where fortunes shifted hands between bites of Hanwoo beef and whispered negotiations. Courtney Baker smoothed her uniform in the cramped service corridor, her fingers betraying her despite the suffocating heat. She was 26 but carried the weariness of twice that, her body hollowed out by double shifts and a loss she couldn't articulate. 2 months into this position, and she still jumped when the kitchen doors burst open. The tips kept her grandmother's medication arriving on time. The anxiety kept her from sleeping. Baker, eyes down, snapped Minjun, the floor supervisor, a wiry man whose cologne couldn't disguise his nervousness. Table 9 just arrived. You don't initiate eye contact. You don't speak unless addressed directly. You don't even breathe audibly. Courtney frowned, adjusting a napkin on her tray. Who is it? The assemblyman again? Minjun's complexion went ashen. Worse, Goi Mryong. The entire kitchen froze. The sous chef's knife stopped mid-slice. Even the dishwasher's hands stilled in the gray water. Every soul in Seoul knew that name. Jumryong, the Golden Dragon Syndicate. They controlled shipping lanes, construction permits, politicians. Junseo owned the city's skeleton, widowed mysteriously, isolated completely, and infamous for leaving his adversaries unrecognizable. I'll take it, Courtney whispered, though every instinct begged her to flee. She needed the money. Her grandmother needed her. Nothing else mattered. She pushed through into the dining room. The usual hum of wealth and influence had dropped to a hushed tension. At table 9, the premium position, obscured by shadows yet commanding sightlines to every entrance, sat a man who resembled vengeance carved from marble. Junso was 36, dressed in a suit so impeccably cut it functioned as armor. His hair was jet black, styled back to expose a face of brutal beauty. Ink crept up his neck like chains of violence loom visible even in the dim light. His eyes swept the space with predatory calculation, cold and methodical. A scar traced through his right eyebrow, evidence of a battle he'd clearly survived. But it wasn't the man who stole Courtney's breath. It was the child. Seated in a custom designer high chair beside him was a little girl, no more than 2. She had curls the shade of rich amber, wild and soft, framing a face of devastating solemnity. Her eyes were deep brown, impossibly aware, holding a sorrow that didn't belong in someone so small. She gripped a faded cloth doll against her chest, tiny knuckles white around its arm. The child wore a crimson velvet dress, exquisite and expensive, but she looked like a phantom. This was Gi Mi-hai, the silent heir. Whispers claimed she'd never spoken. Not since the house fire that killed her mother. Not since the night that shattered her world. Courtney approached the table, water carafe trembling in her grip. Good evening, sir, she managed, keeping her voice level despite her hammering pulse. Still or sparkling? Junseo didn't lift his gaze from the leather-bound menu. Sparkling, and warm milk for the child. Not hot warm. Of course. As Courtney leaned forward to pour water into his crystal glass, her wrist grazed the table's edge. A scent lifted from her skin unintended, barely there. Cocoa butter lotion, cheap jasmine soap from the corner store, the kind that cost 3,001 and smelled like perseverance. Junseo went rigid, his entire frame locked. He looked up, and his eyes, those merciless, calculating eyes, crashed into hers like a collision. For a heartbeat, Something flickered across his features. Recognition. Pain. A memory clawing toward the surface from some buried place. Then it vanished, replaced by Arctic indifference. "Be efficient," he commanded, his voice a blade wrapped in velvet. Courtney nodded and pivoted toward the child, forcing warmth into her exhausted expression. "And for you, sweetheart," she murmured, crouching slightly to meet the girl's gaze. "Let's get you something nice to drink." Mihai slowly raised her head. When the little girl's eyes locked with Courtney's, time fractured. Courtney felt it like a blade to the sternum, a jolt of electricity that tore through her ribcage and seized her lungs. It was a sensation she hadn't experienced in 2 years, not since the day she'd awakened in a sterile clinic room, sedated and destroyed, while a clinical voice informed her that her baby hadn't survived the surrogacy. That phantom ache in her womb, the one she'd buried beneath bills and exhaustion, erupted back to life with savage force. The child's lips parted. Her small body trembled. She released the cloth doll and it tumbled to the marble floor in agonizing slow motion. Then Mihai did something she had never done in 730 days of silence. She pointed. A tiny, shaking finger aimed directly at Courtney Baker's heart, and she screamed, "Mama!" The word detonated through the obsidian table like an explosive. Every conversation died. Every utensil froze mid-motion. Every head snapped toward table 9, where the most dangerous man in Seoul stared at his daughter in absolute, soul-destroying shock. Junso's chair scraped violently as he surged to his feet, his hand instinctively moving toward the weapon beneath his jacket. His eyes locked on Courtney with lethal intensity, and in that instant, she understood what it meant to be hunted. "Who are you?" His voice was death-whispered. "Who sent you?" Courtney couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe because Mihai was reaching for her now. Small arms extended, tears streaming down her face as she screamed the word again and again. "Mama! Mama! Mama!" And somewhere deep in Courtney Baker's fractured heart, a truth she didn't yet comprehend began to claw its way toward the light. Welcome to Dora's Romance Stories. Before we dive into this tale of betrayal and redemption, comment down below where you're watching from and what time it is. Don't forget to like and subscribe to join the family. Courtney didn't remember being hauled through the kitchen. Didn't remember the service exit or the alley or the moment Junseo's hand clamped around her wrist like an iron manacle. What she remembered was the cold, the March wind slicing through her uniform as he forced her into the back of a black SUV that reeked of leather and cordite and something darker she couldn't identify. Mihai was wailing. High-pitched, desperate cries that scraped against Courtney's skull like shattered glass. The little girl thrashed in her car seat, face flushed and slick with tears, reaching toward Courtney with hands that trembled with desperate need. "Please," Courtney heard herself say, though her voice sounded distant, submerged. "Let me hold her. She's terrified." Junseo's jaw worked in the rearview mirror, his eyes black voids of fury. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse out of sheer cruelty. Then he jerked his head once a brutal nod of permission. Courtney's fingers fumbled with the buckle. The instant Mihai was free, the child launched herself into Courtney's arms, tiny fists clutching her uniform, face buried against her neck. The screaming stopped. Just like that, the silence that followed was so absolute it felt alive, pressing down on them, suffocating. Junso's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. Courtney watched him through the mirror, watched the muscle jump in his jaw, watched something like anguish flicker across his face before he buried it beneath stone. He was staring at them, at the way Mihai fit perfectly against Courtney's chest, the way the child's curls mingled with Courtney's dark hair, the way their skin tones blended like watercolors bleeding into each other. They looked like they belonged together, and that realization was making him murderous. Junso is acting out of fear and confusion, but kidnapping is never the answer. If you believe women should be listened to, not silenced, hit subscribe. Comment respect her if you stand with Courtney. The moment stretched like a wire pulled to breaking. Junseo stood frozen, his hand still hovering near his concealed weapon, his eyes boring into Courtney with an intensity that made her bones ache. Mihai's screams had transformed the entire restaurant into a pressure cooker. Every patron, every server, every corrupt politician, and laundered millionaire sat paralyzed, watching the Golden Dragon's world fracture in real time. Then Junseo moved. He snapped his fingers once. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. Within seconds, Men materialized from the shadows. They wore expensive suits that couldn't quite hide the violence coiled beneath. No words were exchanged. They didn't need them. One gestured sharply toward the main entrance. Another moved to the kitchen doors. A third positioned himself near the private dining rooms, his hand inside his jacket. "Clear it," Junseo said, his voice barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "Everyone out, now." Min-jun appeared at Courtney's side, his face slick with panic sweat. "Sir, we have the deputy minister in the—" Junseo's gaze cut to him. The floor supervisor's words died in his throat. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste to comply. The evacuation was surgical, efficient, terrifying. Patrons were escorted out with firm politeness that barely masked the threat beneath. No one argued. No one demanded explanations. They simply gathered their belongings and fled, their faces carefully blank, already forgetting what they'd witnessed because remembering could be fatal. Courtney tried to back away, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. Mihai had stopped screaming but continued reaching for her, small fingers grasping at the air, tears cutting tracks down her flushed cheeks. The child's face was a portrait of desperate longing that made something crack open inside Courtney's chest. Within 5 minutes, the obsidian table was empty. Just Courtney, Junseo, Mihai, and the silent sentinels positioned at every exit. Junseo lifted his daughter from the high chair with unexpected gentleness. Mihai immediately twisted in his arms, reaching toward Courtney, whimpering like a wounded animal. The sound was gut-wrenching, primal. "Stop," Junseo commanded, but the child didn't obey. She thrashed, her small fists pounding against his chest, her face contorting with anguish. He closed the distance between them in 3 strides. Up close, Courtney could see the details the shadows had hidden, the silver threading through his temples, the faint burn scars on his neck that the tattoos couldn't completely cover, the exhaustion carved into the corners of his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept peacefully in years. "Look at her," Junseo said, his voice rough. "Look at my daughter and tell me you've never seen her before." Courtney forced herself to meet his gaze. "I've never seen her before tonight. I swear to God." "Don't." The word was sharp as a blade. "Don't invoke God in my presence. He abandoned this city a long time ago." He shifted Mihai in his arms, turning the child slightly so the amber light from the remaining candles caught her features. The resemblance hit Courtney like a physical blow. The curve of Mihai's nose, the shape of her eyes, the undertone of her skin that was neither fully Korean nor fully anything else, but a perfect blend that spoke of 2 worlds colliding. She looked at Courtney, then at Mihai, then back at Courtney. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, that's impossible." "Is it?" Junseo stepped closer, crowding her space, using his height as a weapon. "My daughter has never spoken. Not since the night her mother died. Specialists, therapists, psychiatrists, they all said the same thing. Trauma-induced selective mutism. She might never speak again." His jaw clenched. "And then you appear, smelling like cheap soap and desperation, and suddenly she's screaming for her mama. So I'll ask you one more time. Who are you?" "I'm nobody," Courtney said, her voice breaking. "I'm a waitress. I work 2 jobs. I take care of my grandmother. That's my entire life. I don't know why she—" Mihai lunged. Her small body twisted with surprising strength, and before Junseo could react, she'd thrown herself toward Courtney. Instinct took over. Courtney caught her, stumbling backward under the unexpected weight, her arms wrapping around the child automatically. Mihai buried her face in the crook of Courtney's neck and went absolutely still. The crying stopped, the trembling eased. She simply melted against Courtney's body like she'd found the one safe place in a hostile world. Junseo stared at them. Something flickered across his face. Shock, recognition, fury, and beneath it all, a vulnerability so raw it was almost obscene to witness. "My car," he said quietly. "Now. I'm not going anywhere with you." Courtney's voice shook but held. "This is kidnapping. This is a child who won't let go of you." Junseo gestured to one of his men, who immediately moved to flank Courtney's other side. "This is my daughter, who I thought I understood," suddenly speaking for the first time in 2 years. "This is a mystery that could destroy everything I've built, or save the only thing I have left to lose. So you're coming with me, miss. Baker, yes. I already know your name, and we're going to find out exactly what the hell is happening. You can walk, or you can be carried. Your choice. The man beside her placed a hand on her elbow. Not roughly, but with clear intent. Courtney looked down at Mihai, at the way the child clung to her like a lifeline, at the small fingers gripping her uniform so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. She thought about running, screaming, fighting, but Mihai's grip tightened, and the child whispered against her skin, barely audible. Mama, stay. The fight drained out of Courtney like water through a broken dam. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Junso's expression didn't change, but something in his posture relaxed fractionally. He turned toward the exit, and his men moved like a choreographed unit, surrounding Courtney and creating a human corridor through the empty restaurant. The night air hit her like a slap when they emerged into the alley. The SUV waited like a predator, black and gleaming, its engine already running. Junseo opened the rear door himself, gesturing with cold courtesy. Courtney climbed in, still holding Mihai, because letting go felt impossible. The leather seats were cold. The interior smelled like expensive cologne and something metallic she didn't want to identify. Junso slid in beside her, pulling the door shut with a decisive click. The locks engaged automatically. As they pulled away from the obsidian table, Courtney watched the restaurant recede through the tinted window. Her entire life was contained in a small apartment, 3 districts away. Her grandmother would be waiting. Her phone was still in her locker. No one knew where she was. And the most dangerous man in Seoul was sitting 18 inches away, watching her with eyes that promised consequences she couldn't begin to imagine. Junso is acting out of fear and confusion, but kidnapping is never the answer. If you believe women should be listened to, not silenced, hit subscribe. Comment, respect her if you stand with Courtney. The estate materialized from the darkness like something out of a nightmare or a fortress designed to withstand siege. 12-foot walls topped with surveillance cameras. Iron gates that opened with mechanical precision. Security checkpoints manned by stone-faced guards who nodded at Junso with military deference. Courtney watched it all through the tinted window, her arms still wrapped around Mihai, who had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep against her chest. The SUV rolled to a stop beneath a covered portico. Warm light spilled from floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than Courtney earned in a year. The architecture was modern brutalist, all clean lines and deliberate intimidation. Glass and steel and money that didn't need to announce itself. Junso exited first, then waited with strained patience as Courtney carefully extracted herself from the vehicle without waking the child. Mihai's small body was dead weight, her curls tickling Courtney's jaw, her breathing deep, and even in a way that suggested she hadn't slept this peacefully in a very long time. A woman appeared in the doorway, late 50s, silver-haired, wearing a crisp black uniform that marked her as staff, but her posture suggested she was far more than that. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw Mihai in Courtney's arms. "Ajumoni," Junseo said quietly. "Prepare the guest suite on the 2nd floor. And call Dr. Yoon. Tell him I need him here within the hour. It's not negotiable." The woman Ajumoni looked between Junseo and Courtney, her expression carefully neutral, despite the obvious questions burning behind her eyes. "Yes, sir. Should I take Mihai to—" "No." The word came from Courtney before she could stop herself. Mihai had tightened her grip in her sleep, as if sensing the possibility of separation. "Please. She just fell asleep. I don't want to wake her." Junso studied them for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he nodded once. "The guest suite has a daybed. She can sleep there. For now." He led them through hallways that echoed with their footsteps, past rooms filled with expensive minimalism and carefully curated art that probably cost more than Courtney would earn in a lifetime. Everything was pristine, sterile, beautiful in the way a museum is beautiful, meant to be observed, not lived in. The guest suite was on the 2nd floor, overlooking the gardens. It was larger than Courtney's entire apartment, a sitting area, a bedroom with a king-size bed, an ensuite bathroom with marble fixtures, and yes, a daybed positioned near the window. Courtney laid Mihai down carefully, removing the child's small shoes, covering her with a cashmere throw that was softer than anything Courtney had ever touched. Mihai didn't stir, just curled onto her side, her small fist tucked under her chin, and continued sleeping. Junseo stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway lights, his expression unreadable. Dr. Yoon will be here soon. He's discreet. He's also the only person I trust with this. With what? Courtney straightened, her voice low to avoid waking the child. What exactly do you think is happening here? I think you know. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with careful quietness. I think you know exactly what's happening, and you're deciding whether to lie to me or not. Courtney's laugh was bitter, nearly hysterical. You think I'm lying. You dragged me here at gunpoint. I don't need a gun to make you do anything. He moved closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. I have your grandmother's address. I know she has COPD. I know she gets her medications from the Hanam-dong pharmacy every third Wednesday. I know you send money to your cousin in Busan twice a month. I know everything about you, Miss Baker. And I learned it all in the 20 minutes it took to drive here. The words hit like punches. Courtney felt the blood drain from her face. So please, Junseo continued, his voice dangerously soft. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you're some innocent bystander. My daughter recognized you. She spoke for the first time in 2 years because of you. And you're going to tell me why. Before Courtney could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. Ajumoni entered with a middle-aged man carrying a leather medical bag. He was slight, bespectacled, wearing rumpled clothes that suggested he'd been pulled from sleep. Dr. Yoon, Junseo said, his tone shifting to something almost cordial. Thank you for coming. Dr. Yoon's gaze moved from Junseo to Courtney to the sleeping child on the daybed. His expression remained professionally blank, but Courtney saw the questions forming behind his eyes. You said it was urgent. I need a DNA test. Paternity. Junseo paused, his jaw clenching. Maternity. Between the child and Miss Baker. I need the results tonight. Dr. Yoon blinked. Tonight? Junseo see, a proper analysis takes. I have a lab here, fully equipped. You'll have everything you need. Junseo's voice brooked no argument. I need results in 4 hours. Can you do it or should I find someone who can? The doctor's shoulders sagged slightly. I can do it. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur. Dr. Yoon worked with efficient quietness, swabbing the inside of Courtney's cheek, then so carefully doing the same to Mihai, who barely stirred. He drew blood from Courtney with practiced ease, labeled vials with steady hands, and packed everything into a specialized container. I'll begin immediately, he said, and disappeared down the hallway. Junseo stood by the window, his back to Courtney, his hands clasped behind him. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. It won't match, Courtney finally said, her voice hollow. Whatever you think this is, you're wrong. Then you have nothing to worry about. I had a baby 2 years ago. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. I was a surrogate. I needed the money. My grandmother's medical bills, my student loans, I was drowning. So I signed up with a fertility clinic. They matched me with a couple. I never met them. That was part of the contract. Anonymous surrogacy. Junseo turned slowly, his expression unreadable. I carried that baby for 9 months, Courtney continued, her voice cracking. I felt every kick, every hiccup. I sang to her. I talked to her. And then, her breath hitched. Then something went wrong during delivery. They put me under. When I woke up, they told me the baby didn't make it. Stillborn. They told me it happens sometimes. They told me there was nothing anyone could have done. You believed them. Why wouldn't I? Tears burned her eyes. I was alone. I was scared. I signed papers. I took the final payment. And I tried to forget. Junseo crossed the room in 3 strides. He gripped her shoulders not roughly, but firmly enough that she couldn't look away. What was the name of the clinic? Seoul Fertility Institute. In Gangnam. Something flashed across his face. Recognition. Fury. My wife used that clinic. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them wanted to voice. 4 hours later, Dr. Yoon returned. His face was ashen. His hands trembled slightly as he held out a folder. Junseo took it, opened it, and read in silence. Courtney watched the color drain from his face, watched his knuckles go white around the paper, watched something fundamental break behind his eyes. 99.9%, he whispered. Probability of maternity. 99.9%. The folder slipped from his fingers, scattering papers across the floor. Courtney's legs gave out. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her entire body shaking. That's impossible. They told me she was dead. They told me. They lied. Junso's voice was hollow. Destroyed. My wife lied. The clinic lied. And my daughter. He looked at Mihai, still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the bomb that had just detonated through their lives. My daughter is your daughter. Courtney pressed her hands over her mouth, muffling the sob that tore from her throat. She's alive, she whispered. Oh God, she's alive. Dawn broke over Seoul like a wound, bleeding pale light across the city's skyline. Courtney hadn't slept. Neither had Junso. They'd spent the night in opposite corners of the guest suite, watching Mihai sleep, each drowning in their own private horror, while the DNA results sat on the table between them like evidence of a crime neither had committed but both had suffered. At 6 a.m., Junseo's phone buzzed. He answered without greeting, listened for 30 seconds, and ended the call with a single word. Bring him. Who? Courtney's voice was raw from crying, from rage, from exhaustion that went bone deep. Dr. Park Min-ho, the fertility specialist who handled my wife's case at Seoul Fertility Institute. Junseo's eyes were bloodshot but hard as granite. He's been on my payroll for 2 years. Insurance. I wanted to make sure certain medical records stayed buried. Turns out I was paying to keep my own secrets from myself. Courtney stood, her muscles protesting. You knew something was wrong. I suspected my wife had lied about the pregnancy. She disappeared for weeks, claimed she was on a wellness retreat, came back different, distant. His jaw clenched, but I thought she'd used a donor egg and didn't want me to know. I thought Mihai might not be biologically mine. I never imagined... He stopped, his throat working. I never imagined this. An hour later, they were in Junseo's study, a room that felt more like an interrogation chamber, with its steel desk, bare walls, and single overhead light that cast harsh shadows. Dr. Park was already there, seated in a chair that had been bolted to the floor, his wrists zip-tied behind his back. He was in his 50s, balding, wearing wrinkled pajamas beneath a hastily thrown-on coat. 2 of Junseo's men flanked the door, their faces impassive. Dr. Park's eyes widened when he saw Junso, then went nearly white when he spotted Courtney behind him. No, the doctor whispered. No, this isn't. Shut up. Junso circled him like a predator assessing prey. I'm going to ask you questions. You're going to answer truthfully. If I detect even the smallest lie, I'm going to let Miss Baker here break your fingers one by one. Do you understand? Courtney's stomach turned, but she forced herself to remain still, to look cold, to let the doctor believe she was capable of violence, even though her hands were shaking. Dr. Park nodded frantically. Yes, I understand. Junso placed the DNA results on the desk where the doctor could see them. My daughter, Mihai, you were present at her birth. Yes. I supervised the surrogacy. It was standard procedure, I swear. Except it wasn't a surrogacy, was it? Junseo's voice dropped to something deadly quiet. Because the woman who carried my daughter wasn't told she was part of a surrogacy arrangement. She was told she was a surrogate for an anonymous couple. And then she was told her baby died. Dr. Park's face crumbled. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the room's chill. It wasn't my idea. You have to understand. I was following orders. Whose orders? Courtney stepped forward, her voice cracking like a whip. Whose orders were you following when you told me my daughter was dead? When you made me sign papers while I was still sedated? When you stole 2 years of her life from me? The doctor flinched. Mrs. Han. Junseo C's wife. She came to me 3 years ago. She was desperate. Her family expected an heir. Junseo C's position in the syndicate required legitimate succession, but she couldn't. He swallowed hard. She couldn't conceive. Multiple miscarriages. Scarring. She was infertile. Junseo's hands curled into fists. She told me she was pregnant. I saw the ultrasounds. I felt her stomach. Prosthetics, Dr. Park said miserably. Medical-grade silicone. Progressive sizing. It's more common than you think, especially among women facing social pressure to produce children. She wore them for 7 months. told everyone she was carrying naturally. But she needed a real baby. Courtney's voice was hollow. So she found me. She wanted someone who looked different enough that the child wouldn't resemble you too closely, but similar enough that certain features could be explained away. Your egg, combined with Jun Cossi's sample that he'd provided earlier for fertility preservation. Doctor, Park wouldn't meet their eyes. The embryo was implanted in you. You were told it was for an anonymous couple. Standard gestational surrogacy contract. Everything legal on paper. Except the part where you told me my baby died. Courtney's vision blurred with rage. Except the part where you handed my living, breathing daughter to another woman and let me believe I'd failed her. Mrs. Han paid me 200 million won, Dr. Park whispered. She said it was the only way. That Jun Cossi would never accept a child that wasn't biologically his. That if you knew the truth, you'd fight for custody. She convinced me it was a victimless solution. You'd grieve and move on. The child would have a good life. Everyone would get what they needed. Junso moved so fast, Courtney barely saw it. His hand shot out, gripping Dr. Park's throat, lifting the smaller man partially out of the chair despite the restraints. My daughter didn't speak for 2 years. 2 years. Because somewhere in her infant brain, she knew something was wrong. She knew she'd been ripped away from the woman who carried her. Who do you think is the victim here? Dr. Park made choking sounds, his face turning purple. Junseo held him there for 5 eternal seconds before releasing him. The doctor collapsed back into the chair, gasping. There's more, Dr. Park wheezed. There's something else you need to know. Junseo's eyes narrowed. Speak. Your cousin. Taewook. He knew about the arrangement. Mrs. Han told him everything. She trusted him. Dr. Park's voice dropped to barely audible. He was furious. He said the child was impure. Mixed blood. That she would weaken the family's position in the syndicate. He wanted Mrs. Han to terminate the pregnancy, but she refused. Courtney felt ice flood her veins. What are you saying? I'm saying that when Mrs. Han died in that house fire 2 years ago, it might not have been an accident. Dr. Park's eyes filled with tears. Taewook visited my office 3 days before the fire. He asked me about the surrogacy records, about where the biological mother was. He said the situation needed to be cleaned up. I thought he meant paperwork. But then Mrs. Han died, and I started wondering if he killed her to eliminate the witness who knew the truth about Mihai's origins. Junso's voice was dead calm, which was somehow more terrifying than his rage. And then planned to kill Mihai once she was old enough that her death wouldn't draw too much attention. Dr. Park nodded miserably. He called me last month. Asked if the child showed any obvious mixed features yet. I told him children's appearances change as they grow. He said that was unfortunate, that complications might arise. Courtney's knees buckled. Junseo caught her elbow, steadying her, his touch surprisingly gentle given the violence still crackling through his frame. You're telling me my cousin murdered my wife and has been planning to murder my daughter. Junso's words weren't a question. And you've known this for months and said nothing. He's your underboss. He has connections, power. I was terrified. Doctor. Park was openly weeping now. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I just kept the records hidden, maybe he'd forget. Maybe you could keep collecting your hush money and pretend you weren't complicit in conspiracy to commit murder. Junso released Courtney and turned to his men. Take him to the basement. I'll decide what to do with him later. As they dragged the sobbing doctor away, Courtney stared at Junso. Your cousin wants to kill our daughter because she's mine. Because I'm black. Because he thinks that makes her less than human. Yes. Junseo's hands were shaking now, the first crack in his armor. And I've been letting him stand at my right hand, trusting him with syndicate operations, while he's been planning genocide under my own roof. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Courtney spoke, her voice steel. What are you going to do? Junso looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw something that made her breath catch. Not just rage or grief, but a terrible, crystallizing resolve. I'm going to protect her, he said simply. I'm going to protect both of you, whatever it takes. The doctor sold a baby for money and lied to a grieving mother. If this kind of corruption makes you sick, smash that like button, comment justice for Courtney to show you're watching. The morning sun filtered through the study's windows, harsh and unforgiving, illuminating the exhaustion carved into both their faces. Junso stood at the window overlooking his estate, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that suggested military discipline barely containing volcanic rage. Courtney sat in the leather chair Dr. Park had occupied hours earlier, her body numb, her mind struggling to process the enormity of what they'd learned. "You can't go back to your apartment." Junso's voice cut through the silence without preamble. "Taewook will know about last night's incident at the restaurant within hours if he doesn't already. His network is extensive. The moment he realizes Mihai spoke to you, that you're still alive and in my custody, he'll move against you." Courtney's laugh was bitter. "So I'm a prisoner here. You're alive here." He turned to face her, and the rawness in his expression caught her off guard. This wasn't the cold Mafia boss from the restaurant. This was a man watching his entire world reconstruct itself in real time. "Out there, you're a loose end. A witness to a conspiracy that implicates one of the most powerful men in my organization. Taewook won't risk exposure. He'll eliminate you and make it look like an accident, just like he did with my wife." "Your wife?" Courtney's voice hardened. "The woman who stole my daughter and let me believe she was dead." "Yes." Junseo didn't flinch from the accusation. "She was desperate, cruel, and wrong, but she's also dead, and I can't punish a ghost." Taewook, however, his jaw clenched. "He's very much alive, and he's been operating in my shadow for 2 years, waiting for the right moment to finish what he started." Courtney stood, her legs unsteady. "So what? You're going to keep me locked in this fortress forever? What about my grandmother, my job, my life? Your grandmother will be moved here by this afternoon. I've already sent people to collect her and her medical equipment. She'll have round-the-clock care, better than anything that pharmacy in Hanamdong could provide." He said it matter-of-factly, as if relocating people against their will was a minor logistical detail. "As for your job, you're done at the Obsidian Table. They've already been compensated for your abrupt departure and your silence." The casual way he'd rearranged her entire existence made fury spike through her exhaustion. "You can't just..." "I can, and I have. Because if I don't, you'll be dead by next week." He crossed the space between them, his presence overwhelming. "Taewook controls half the police force. He has connections in hospitals, morgues, government offices. If he wants you erased, you'll vanish so completely that even I won't be able to find your body." The blunt brutality of his words stole her breath. "Then what's your solution? Hide me here until he forgets I exist?" "He won't forget. Men like Taewook don't forget threats to their vision of purity." Junso's voice dropped lower, more deliberate. "But there is one way to make you untouchable. One way to give you status that even he can't circumvent without declaring open war against me." Courtney's heart hammered against her ribs. "What are you talking about?" "Marriage." The word hung between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. "You become my wife. Legally, publicly. Mihai's stepmother on paper, though we both know the truth. It gives you my name, my protection, my resources. Taewook can't touch you without committing treason against the family." The absurdity of it hit her like a physical blow. "You're insane." "I'm strategic." Junseo's eyes were unflinching. "I need to legitimize Mihai's position in the syndicate. Right now, she's my daughter. But with your arrival, questions will arise. Paternity tests can be demanded by rival factions. DNA evidence could be used against us. But if you're my wife, if we present a united front, the narrative becomes simple. Mihai is our daughter. Any suggestion otherwise becomes an insult to my entire household. You're asking me to marry you to protect a lie." Courtney's voice shook. "To pretend we're some happy family while your cousin plots to kill our daughter. I'm asking you to marry me to protect the truth." Junseo's hand shot out, gripping her wrist not roughly, but firmly enough that she couldn't pull away. "The truth is that Mihai is ours, yours and mine. The truth is that you carried her, birthed her, and had her stolen from you. The truth is that I've been raising her without knowing her mother was alive and grieving. This marriage corrects that injustice while keeping all 3 of us alive long enough to deal with Taewook." Courtney tried to wrench her arm free, but his grip held. "This is crazy. I don't even know you. You kidnapped me. You've controlled every aspect of my life in the last 12 hours. And I'm offering you agency now." He released her wrist but didn't step back. "Say no, and I'll still protect you. I'll hide you somewhere Taewook can't reach. But you'll never see Mihai again. Because I won't risk my daughter's life by allowing unsanctioned contact with a woman who has no legal claim to her. Say yes, and you become her mother in every way that matters. Legally, socially, you'll have power, protection, and most importantly, you'll have her." The choice wasn't really a choice at all, and they both knew it. Courtney thought of Mihai's small body curled against hers, the way the child had finally slept peacefully for the first time in years. She thought of 2 years of phantom aches and grief that had carved her hollow. She thought of what it would mean to walk away now, knowing her daughter was alive but forever out of reach. "If I agree," she said slowly, "this is a contract, not a real marriage. I'm doing this for Mihai, not for you. Understood?" Something flickered across Junso's face, relief, perhaps, or respect. "I have no romantic illusions about this arrangement. This is survival, protection, strategy. And when Taewook is dealt with, when the threat is gone, then we revisit the terms." Junso moved to his desk, unlocking a drawer with a key he wore on a chain around his neck. But that could take months, years. He's embedded deeply in the organization. Removing him will require precision and patience. He withdrew a small velvet box, aged and worn at the edges. When he opened it, Courtney's breath caught. Inside was a ring sapphire, deep blue as midnight, set in platinum with diamonds arranged in a pattern that looked almost like dragon scales. It was stunning, old, clearly precious in ways that transcended monetary value. "This belonged to my grandmother," Junso said quietly. "She wore it for 53 years of marriage. My mother refused it, said it was too traditional, too heavy with expectation. My wife..." He stopped, correcting himself. "The woman I thought was my wife never saw it. I kept it locked away." He held it out to Courtney, and in the morning light, the sapphire seemed to glow with inner fire. "I'm not asking you to love me," he continued. "I'm not asking you to forgive what my family has done to you. I'm asking you to wear this ring and stand beside me while we protect our daughter from a man who sees her as an abomination. Can you do that?" Courtney stared at the ring, at this man who'd shattered her life and was now offering to rebuild it into something unrecognizable. At the impossible choice that wasn't really a choice at all. She thought of Mihai reaching for her, screaming "Mama," with 2 years of silence breaking in her small voice. She extended her hand. Junso slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. The weight of it was substantial, grounding, a physical reminder of the bargain she was making. "We'll marry within the week," Junseo said, his voice all business now. "Small ceremony, immediate family only. We'll announce it to the syndicate at the Golden Dragon Gala next month. That gives us time to prepare, to present a united front before Taewook can maneuver against us." Courtney looked down at the ring, at the way the sapphire caught the light and threw it back in fractured pieces, beautiful and broken at the same time. "For Mihai," she whispered. "For Mihai," Junseo agreed. And with that, Courtney Baker became someone else entirely. Someone who wore heirloom rings and married into criminal empires and called a fortress home. Someone whose daughter was finally, impossibly, within reach. Someone who had no idea how much blood would be spilled before this bargain reached its end. 3 weeks into their arrangement, the fortress began to feel less like a prison and more like a battleground where small victories were won in whispers and cautious touches. Courtney's grandmother had settled into the guest wing with surprising adaptability, her oxygen machine humming beside a window that overlooked gardens she claimed were too perfect to be real. Mihai had begun speaking in full sentences, hesitant at first, then with increasing confidence, as if making up for 2 years of silence all at once. And Courtney had learned to navigate the strange ecosystem of Junso's world, where armed men bowed when she passed and staff anticipated her needs before she voiced them. The sapphire ring on her finger had become both armor and anchor, a constant reminder of the role she was playing and the child she was playing it for. Tonight, she stood in her bedroom, no longer the guest suite, but a space adjacent to Junseo's own quarters, connected by a door that remained locked from both sides, struggling with the zipper of a midnight blue dress. The Golden Dragon Gala was tomorrow night, their public debut as husband and wife. The moment when Courtney Baker would officially become Courtney Han, stepmother to the syndicate heir, and paint a target on her back that no amount of sapphire could fully protect her from. The zipper caught halfway up her spine, the teeth snagging on fabric she couldn't see and couldn't reach. She twisted awkwardly, her shoulder protesting, frustration building with each failed attempt. A knock on the connecting door made her freeze. "Courtney." Junseo's voice was muffled but clear. "Mihai wants to say goodnight. May I bring her in?" She grabbed a robe, pulling it over the half-zipped dress. "Yes, come in." The door opened, and Mihai ran through first, her small feet padding across the floor in princess pajamas covered in cartoon rabbits. She'd grown comfortable with Courtney in a way that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. This child who'd been starved of maternal touch now sought it constantly, as if trying to store up affection against some future famine. "Mama, look!" Mihai held up a drawing, crayon marks in enthusiastic chaos. "I drawed our family. That's you, that's me, that's Appa, and that's great-grandmother with her special air machine." Courtney crouched down, her heart squeezing. The figures were barely recognizable stick people with wild hair and smiling faces, but Mihai had drawn them holding hands, connected in a chain that suggested safety, belonging. "It's beautiful, baby. Should we hang it on the fridge?" "Yes. And tomorrow you have to wear your pretty dress, and Appa has to wear his suit, and we all have to look like a real family." Mihai threw her arms around Courtney's neck, squeezing tight. "I'm so excited I might not sleep ever again." Junseo stood in the doorway, watching this exchange with an expression Courtney had learned to recognize, a softness he only allowed himself around his daughter, a vulnerability that vanished the moment anyone else entered the room. He was in casual clothes tonight, black shirt and dark slacks, his tattoos visible where the collar opened at his throat, dragon scales and Korean script that she'd glimpsed but never asked about. "You'll sleep," he said, his voice gentle in a way that still surprised Courtney. "Or Mama will be very disappointed tomorrow when you're too tired to dance with me at the gala." Mihai gasped. "We're going to dance?" "Every daughter gets one dance with her father. It's tradition." He held out his hand. "Come on, little dragon. Let's get you to bed before you vibrate through the floor." Mihai kissed Courtney's cheek with wet, enthusiastic affection, then took her father's hand. At the doorway, she turned back. "Mama, will you check on me after I'm asleep? Like real mamas do?" The question gutted Courtney. "Of course, baby. I'll check on you." After they left, Courtney stood there for a long moment, pressing her palm against her chest where the ache lived. This child who called her Mama. This child she'd carried and lost and found again. This impossible, miraculous child who was healing something in Courtney she hadn't known was broken. She turned back to the mirror, attempting the zipper again. It caught in the same spot, refusing to cooperate. She was seriously considering sleeping in the dress when another knock came. "It's me," Junseo's voice. "Mihai wanted me to tell you that she loves you and that you're the best mama in the whole world and possibly the universe." Despite everything, Courtney smiled. "Tell her the feeling is mutual." A pause. The connecting door. "May I?" She hesitated, then wrapped the robe tighter. "Yes." He entered, and in the low lighting of her bedroom, he looked different. Less like the golden dragon, and more like a man carrying exhaustion in the set of his shoulders. His hair was slightly mussed, as if Mihai had been playing with it during the bedtime routine. "She's asleep," he said. "Finally." She asked me 17 questions about tomorrow night, what the gala looks like, who will be there, whether you'll still be her mama after everyone sees you. His jaw tightened. I told her nothing could change that. I hope I didn't overstep. "You didn't." Courtney's throat felt tight. She needs that certainty, especially with Taewook. She stopped. They didn't speak his name around Mihai, as if saying it might summon him. "Especially tomorrow," Junseo finished. "He'll be there, watching, calculating. We need to be flawless." "I know." She gestured helplessly at her dress. "Which is why it's very inconvenient that I can't get this zipper up. I've been fighting with it for 20 minutes. Something shifted in Junseo's expression. "Turn around." "What?" "Turn around. I'll help." Courtney's pulse kicked up for reasons she didn't want to examine. She turned, letting the robe slip off her shoulders, exposing her bare back and the half-zipped dress. The air felt suddenly charged, intimate in a way their arrangement had carefully avoided. Junseo's fingers found the zipper. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he worked the caught fabric free, his knuckles brushing against her spine. "You have a scar here," he said quietly. "A surgical scar." Courtney's breath hitched. "From the C-section. When I delivered Mihai, it didn't heal well. The clinic said it was normal, but..." She swallowed hard. "It's a reminder of everything they took from me." His fingers stilled. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he drew the zipper up slowly, his touch lingering longer than necessary. When he finished, his hands remained on her shoulders, warm through the thin fabric. "Turn around," he said again, his voice rougher now. She did. They were inches apart, close enough that she could see the faint scar through his eyebrow, the shadow of exhaustion beneath his eyes, the way his throat moved when he swallowed. "I have scars too," Junseo said. He unbuttoned his shirt slowly, deliberately, revealing the full expanse of his tattoos, the dragon that coiled from his chest to his shoulder, the script that ran along his ribs, and beneath the ink, puckered burns that twisted the skin into uneven patterns. "From the fire that killed my wife. I tried to save her. I failed." Courtney's hand moved before she could stop it, her fingers tracing the edge of one burned scar. "Did you love her?" "I thought I did. But now I wonder if I loved the idea of her more than the reality." His eyes met hers, and the intensity there made her breath catch. "She lied to me about the most fundamental thing our daughter's existence, and I never saw it. I never questioned. I accepted the fiction because it was easier than facing the truth." "What truth?" "That I was alone in that marriage. That she married me for status and security, and I married her for..." He stopped, his jaw clenching. For the same reasons, probably. Love had nothing to do with it. Courtney's hand was still on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath scarred skin and ink. "Is that what this is? Another marriage without love? I don't know what this is." Junseo's hand came up, covering hers, pressing it more firmly against his chest. "I know I watch you with Mihai, and I see something I've never seen before. Patience, gentleness, real love, not the performance of it. And I know that when I think about Taewook harming either of you, I feel something that goes beyond strategy or obligation." "What do you feel?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Rage, terror, something that looks dangerously close to..." He stopped himself, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Something I'm not ready to name." They were so close now that Courtney could feel the heat radiating off him. His eyes dropped to her mouth. Her breath caught. The space between them felt charged, electric, like standing at the edge of a cliff and feeling the pull of gravity. Junseo leaned in. Courtney's eyes fluttered closed. Their lips were a breath apart. A small voice from the hallway shattered the moment. "Appa? I can't sleep. Can Mama come read me a story?" They sprang apart like they'd been burned. Junseo buttoned his shirt with shaking hands while Courtney grabbed her robe, her face flushing hot. "Coming, baby," Courtney called, her voice too bright, too strained. Junseo moved toward the connecting door, pausing at the threshold. When he looked back, his expression was carefully neutral, but something smoldered beneath the surface. "Tomorrow night," he said. "We present as a united front. Whatever Taewook tries, we face it together." "Together," Courtney echoed. After he left, she pressed her fingers to her lips, feeling the ghost of a kiss that never happened but somehow changed everything anyway. The Golden Dragon Gala was held in a converted museum overlooking the Han River, a space where ancient artifacts lived behind bulletproof glass and modern money flowed like water. Crystal chandeliers hung from soaring ceilings, casting fractured light across marble floors polished to mirror shine. The guest list read like a who's who of Seoul's most dangerous and influential. Politicians who'd sold their integrity decades ago, businessmen whose fortunes were built on blood, and syndicate heads from across Asia who'd come to pay homage to the Golden Dragon himself. Courtney stood at the top of the grand staircase, her hand resting lightly on Junseo's arm, and tried to remember how to breathe. The dress Junseo's stylist had selected was a masterpiece deep emerald silk that hugged her curves before flowing into a train that whispered against the stairs. The neckline was modest but elegant, drawing attention to the sapphire ring that glinted on her finger, and the matching sapphire necklace, another family heirloom that rested against her collarbone. Her hair was swept up, exposing the graceful line of her neck, and her makeup was flawless in a way that made her look both powerful and untouchable. Junseo wore a black suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His hair styled back to reveal the sharp planes of his face and the tattoos that crept up his neck. Together, they looked like what they were supposed to be, a power couple, united, formidable. "Ready?" Junseo murmured, his hand covering hers. "No," Courtney admitted, "but let's do it anyway." They descended the stairs together. The effect was immediate and electric. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned in synchronized fascination. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as the golden dragon presented his new wife to the underworld that served him. Courtney felt every eye on her, felt the weight of judgment, curiosity, and in some faces, thinly veiled hostility. She was the outsider, the American, the black woman who'd somehow infiltrated one of Seoul's most insular criminal dynasties. She could read the questions in their stares. Who was she? Where had she come from? What did she want? At the base of the stairs, Junseo turned to her, his expression softening in a way that was just visible enough to be noticed but subtle enough to maintain his reputation. "You're stunning," he said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Every person in this room wishes they were me right now." It was performance, carefully choreographed, but the way his eyes lingered on her face suggested something beneath the script. Courtney smiled, letting herself lean into him slightly, playing her part. "Then let's give them something to talk about." The next hour was a blur of introductions and careful conversations. Junseo kept her close, his hand never leaving the small of her back, a gesture that was both possessive and protective. He introduced her as "my wife Courtney," with a finality that discouraged questions about how they'd met or how long they'd known each other. Most people had the sense to accept the narrative without probing. Those who didn't received a look from Junseo that made them remember exactly who they were dealing with. Courtney played her role flawlessly. She smiled at the right moments, laughed at unfunny jokes, and deflected invasive questions with practiced grace. She was charming but not too familiar, confident but not threatening. She was exactly what Junseo needed her to be, a partner who enhanced his position rather than undermined it. And then Taewook found them. He emerged from the crowd like a shark cutting through water, tall, elegant, wearing a suit of charcoal gray that made his smile look even colder. He was younger than Junseo by perhaps 5 years, handsome in a way that felt calculated, and carried himself with the arrogance of a man who'd never been told no. His eyes, dark and assessing, locked onto Courtney with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Cousin," he said, his voice smooth as poison. "You've been hiding your beautiful bride from us. How ungenerous." Junseo's hand tightened fractionally at Courtney's waist. "Taewook, I wondered when you'd make your appearance. I wouldn't miss the opportunity to welcome your wife to the family." Taewook's smile didn't reach his eyes. He extended a hand to Courtney, and after a beat's hesitation, she took it. His grip was firm, just shy of painful. "Courtney, is it? Such an American name. Tell me, how did you and my cousin meet? The circumstances of your courtship have been remarkably private." "We value discretion," Courtney said evenly, extracting her hand from his grip. "Surely you understand the importance of privacy in your line of work." "Our line of work," Taewook corrected, his smile sharpening. "Your family now, which means the syndicate's business is your business. The syndicate's traditions are your traditions. The syndicate's standards are your standards." There it was, the threat wrapped in courtesy. Courtney felt Junseo tense beside her, felt the shift in his energy from controlled to dangerous. But before he could respond, she stepped forward slightly, claiming the space between them. "Standards," she repeated, her voice carrying just enough edge to be noticed. "You mean the standard of loyalty? Of protecting family above all else? Of ensuring the next generation thrives?" She let her gaze travel over Taewook with deliberate assessment. "Because those are the standards I intend to uphold. Mihai's well-being is my priority. Everything else is secondary." Taewook's smile froze. Something flickered behind his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recalculation. "Mihai, yes, the child. She's been thriving lately, I hear. Finally speaking after so long, quite miraculous." "A mother's love works miracles," Courtney said, her tone deceptively light. Surely you've heard the expression? Or is that too American for syndicate tradition? The air between them crackled with tension. Several nearby conversations had stopped, guests sensing drama unfolding but not quite understanding the subtext. Junso watched Courtney with something that might have been admiration, or might have been concern, possibly both. Taewook leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a register only their small circle could hear. You should understand something about our family, Courtney. We value purity, lineage, the strength that comes from undiluted bloodlines passed down through generations. It's what makes us powerful, what keeps us unified. His eyes traveled over her deliberately, making his meaning unmistakable. Dilution weakens us, makes us vulnerable to those who would see us fall. The racist subtext wasn't even subtext anymore, it was text, bold and undeniable. Courtney felt rage flood her system, hot and clarifying. This man had killed Junseo's wife, had planned to kill Mihai, and now stood here in his expensive suit, wrapped in respectability, threatening her with coded language about blood purity. I've learned something about strength, Courtney said, her voice steady despite the fury coursing through her. It doesn't come from keeping bloodlines pure. It comes from adaptation, evolution. The willingness to embrace what makes you different instead of fearing it. She stepped closer, invading his space the way he'd invaded hers. Mihai is stronger because of her mixed heritage, not weaker. She carries the best of multiple worlds. That's not dilution, Taewook. That's enrichment. And if you can't see that, then you're the weakness in this family, not her. The silence that followed was absolute. Taewook's face had gone carefully blank, but rage simmered in his eyes like something barely contained. Junso's hand had moved to the small of Courtney's back again, but this time it felt less like protection and more like solidarity, a united front against a common enemy. Bold words, Taewook said softly, from someone who's been family for less than a month. I hope your confidence is justified, Courtney, because in our world, weakness, no matter how beautifully dressed, doesn't survive long. He bowed slightly, the gesture mocking, and disappeared back into the crowd. Courtney's hands were shaking. Junso noticed, his fingers threading through hers, steadying her. That was either very brave or very stupid. He murmured against her ear. Which do you think it was? Both. He turned her to face him, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. But mostly brave. You stood up to him without flinching. Do you have any idea how rare that is? He threatened our daughter. What was I supposed to do? Smile and nod? Most people would have. Junseo's thumb brushed over her knuckles. You're not most people. Before Courtney could respond, the music shifted a waltz. Slow and elegant. Junseo led her onto the dance floor, pulling her into his arms with practiced ease. They moved together, and despite everything, despite the danger and the lies and the arrangement that had brought them here, it felt natural. Like they'd been dancing together for years instead of weeks. He's going to move against us soon, Junso said quietly, his lips near her ear. Tonight accelerated his timeline. He knows you're not going to be intimidated. Good, Courtney said fiercely. Let him come. Junso pulled back slightly, studying her face. You've changed. 3 weeks ago you were terrified. Now you're ready to go to war. 3 weeks ago, I didn't know my daughter was alive. Now I do, and I will burn this entire city down before I let him touch her. Something shifted in Junseo's expression, respect, attraction, something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. Then we burn it together, he said. As they danced, Courtney caught sight of Taewook watching from the balcony, his face a mask of cold calculation. She met his stare without flinching, her hand tight in Junseo's, and silently declared war. Taewook judges people based on their race and bloodlines. If you believe love is thicker than blood, hit subscribe. Comment, love wins, if you're rooting for this family. The toast came at midnight, as tradition demanded. Junso stood at the center of the ballroom, Courtney at his side, while servers distributed crystal flutes of champagne that probably cost more per bottle than most people earned in a month. The crowd had gathered in a semicircle. Faces flushed with expensive alcohol and the vicarious thrill of proximity to power. This was the moment when the Golden Dragon would officially acknowledge his new wife, cementing her position in the hierarchy that governed Seoul's underworld. Junso raised his glass, the the crystal catching light and throwing it back in fractured rainbows. "To family," he began, his voice carrying across the space with practiced authority. "To loyalty. To the bonds that define us and the legacy we protect. My wife." The lights died. Not gradually, not with the flicker of electrical failure, but instantly, as if someone had thrown a switch and plunged 300 people into absolute darkness. The kind of darkness that disoriented, that made the massive ballroom feel suddenly claustrophobic despite its soaring ceilings. For a heartbeat, there was stunned silence. Then chaos erupted. Screams pierced the blackness. Glass shattered as champagne flutes hit marble floors. Bodies collided in panic, guests stumbling over chairs and each other in their desperation to find exits they could no longer see. Emergency lighting should have kicked in immediately. The museum's backup systems were state-of-the-art, but nothing came. Just darkness so complete that Courtney couldn't see her own hand when she lifted it in front of her face. "Courtney!" Junso's hand found hers in the chaos, his grip bruising in its intensity. "Stay with me. Don't move." But Courtney's mind had already gone somewhere else. "Mihai." The child was supposed to be in the private room adjacent to the ballroom, with Ajumoni and 2 bodyguards. Safe, protected. Away from the crowd and the danger and men like Taewook who saw her as an abomination. "Mihai," Courtney gasped, already trying to pull away from Junso's grip. "We have to get to..." An explosion of sound cut her off, not gunfire, but flashbangs, the kind that disoriented more than damaged. The percussion waves hit like physical blows, making Courtney's ears ring and her balance desert her. Junso caught her before she fell, his body shielding hers as someone rushed past them in the darkness. "It's a raid," Junso snarled into her ear. "Stay down. My men will." But his words were drowned out by more chaos. Shouts in Korean, the distinctive sound of weapons being drawn, running footsteps that suggested organized movement rather than panicked flight. This wasn't random. This was coordinated, planned. This was Taewook. Emergency lighting finally flickered to life, bathing the ballroom in hellish red. The backup system had been deliberately delayed. Courtney realized just long enough for maximum confusion, maximum opportunity. In the crimson glow, she could see the carnage. Overturned tables, broken glass glittering like scattered diamonds, guests huddled in corners with their hands over their heads. Junso's security team had formed defensive positions, weapons drawn, but they were scanning for external threats, raiders, rival syndicates, law enforcement. No one was looking at the door to the private room. No one except Courtney. The door hung open, swaying slightly on its hinges. The red emergency lighting made the darkness beyond it look like a throat, swallowing whatever lay inside. Courtney's legs moved before her brain could catch up, yanking free from Junseo's grip and running toward that open door. "Courtney, no!" Junseo's voice chased her, desperate and commanding, but she was already crossing the threshold. The private room was destroyed, chairs overturned. The small table where Mihai had been coloring earlier was on its side, crayons scattered across the floor like dropped ammunition. And there, in the center of the devastation, was Ajumoni. The older woman lay crumpled against the wall, her silver hair matted with blood, her eyes closed. Courtney dropped to her knees beside her, hands shaking as she checked for a pulse. It was there, weak but present. The blow to her head had knocked her unconscious but not killed her. Not yet. "Where is she?" Courtney's voice broke on the words. "Where's Mihai?" But Ajumoni couldn't answer. And the 2 bodyguards who should have been here were gone. Either dead, complicit, or dragged away in the chaos. Junso burst through the door, his weapon drawn, his face a mask of lethal focus that fractured the moment he saw the empty room. No, 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 no. Courtney stood on trembling legs, her gaze sweeping the destruction for any clue, any sign of where they'd taken her daughter. That's when she saw it partially hidden beneath an overturned chair, small and familiar and devastating in its innocence. Mihai's cloth doll. The worn rabbit she'd carried since she was an infant, the one she never slept without, the one that smelled like lavender soap in childhood and safety. Courtney picked it up with shaking hands. The fabric was damp. In the red emergency lighting, it took her a moment to process what she was seeing. Then her brain caught up with her eyes, and the world tilted sideways. Blood. The rabbit was smeared with blood, not soaked, but marked. as if small hands had clutched it while bleeding from somewhere. A head wound, maybe, or a cut palm, or they took her. Courtney's voice didn't sound like her own. It sounded distant, hollow, like someone else speaking through her throat. They hurt her and they took her. Junso moved with terrifying speed, already barking orders into a phone that had materialized in his hand. Lock down the building. No one leaves. Scan every vehicle, every room, every goddamn closet. Find my daughter or I will paint these walls with your blood. But Courtney wasn't listening. She was staring at the rabbit, at the crimson stains that marked her daughter's favorite toy, and feeling something inside her chest crack open. Not the phantom ache she'd carried for 2 years. Something worse. Something that felt like the actual, physical tearing of essential organs. She'd found Mihai. She'd held her. She'd heard her daughter call her mama. And now, this was Taewook. Courtney's voice came out flat, emotionless, the kind of calm that preceded violence. He did this. During the toast. During the lights out. He orchestrated everything. Junseo's eyes met hers across the destroyed room. In that moment, they weren't playing roles or maintaining appearances or pretending at marriage for strategic purposes. They were two parents whose child had been ripped away, and the rage that connected them was almost tangible, a living thing, hungry and merciless. Where would he take her? Courtney demanded. Think. You know him. You've worked with him for years. Where? Junso's jaw clenched so hard she could hear his teeth grind. Somewhere public enough that we can't move against him without witnesses. Somewhere high-profile enough that killing her would make a statement. His eyes went distant, calculating. The roof, the helipad. He's going to stage it as an accident, a terrible tragedy during the chaos of the blackout. A child wandering too close to the edge. The words painted a picture so vivid that Courtney tasted bile. She clutched the blood-smeared rabbit against her chest and felt something fundamental shift inside her. Every instinct that had kept her cautious, careful, afraid they all burned away, leaving only primal fury and a mother's desperation. Then we go to the roof, she said. Now. Junseo stared at her, this woman who 3 weeks ago had been a waitress trying to survive, who'd been stolen and DNA tested and forced into an arranged marriage, who'd stood in front of Taewook mere hours ago and declared war with nothing but words as weapons. Now she stood in a destroyed room holding her daughter's bloodied toy, and she looked like she could kill with her bare hands. Stay behind me, Junso commanded, already moving toward the door. If he has her on that roof, he'll have men positioned. This isn't rescue, this is combat. I don't care. Courtney followed him, her heels clicking against marble like gunshots. He touched my daughter. He made her bleed. I don't care if there's an army between us and her, I'm getting her back. They burst back into the ballroom, where order was slowly being restored. Junseo grabbed the nearest security team leader, a man built like a tank with a scar bisecting his left cheek. The roof, full tactical, now. The man didn't ask questions. He just nodded and spoke rapid Korean into his radio, and suddenly 6 armed men were falling into formation around Junso and Courtney. As they moved toward the emergency stairwell, the elevators had been shut down in the blackout. Courtney looked down at the rabbit in her hands one more time. The blood had dried to rust brown. Mihai's blood. Her daughter's blood. She pressed the toy against her lips, a prayer or a promise, and followed Junso into the stairwell. Behind them, the Golden Dragon Gala continued its slow collapse into chaos. But none of that mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was 8 flights up, in the cold March wind, where a monster held a child over the edge of eternity and waited for someone to try to stop him. The stairwell was a concrete nightmare, 8 flights of emergency stairs that spiraled upward in harsh fluorescent lighting that made everything look sickly and surreal. Courtney's heels weren't designed for running, but she kicked them off without breaking stride, her bare feet slapping against cold steps as she climbed. Junso was ahead of her, taking stairs 3 at a time, his weapon drawn, his security team flanking them like a human shield. Every second felt like an eternity. Every flight of stairs felt like a mountain. And somewhere above them, Mihai was bleeding, terrified, in the hands of a man who saw her as an abomination that needed to be erased. They burst through the roof access door into Seoul's winter night. The wind hit like a slap, cold and vicious, carrying the scent of river water and exhaust from the city sprawling below. The museum's helipad occupied the center of the roof, a circle of painted concrete with a sleek black helicopter sitting dormant at its edge. Security lighting illuminated the space in harsh white, throwing long shadows across the rooftop. And there, at the very edge of the building where a waist-high safety barrier was the only thing between concrete and a 7-story drop to the museum's courtyard below, stood Tae-wook. He held Mi-hai against his chest, one arm wrapped around the child's small body, the other hand gripping the back of her dress. Mi-hai wasn't crying. She'd gone beyond crying into that terrible shock silence that children enter when terror overwhelms their capacity to process. Her face was pale, streaked with tears and blood from a cut above her eyebrow. Her eyes were huge and dark and locked on Courtney with desperate recognition. "Mama," she whispered, the word barely audible over the wind. Tae-wook smiled. It was the coldest thing Courtney had ever seen, triumph and contempt wrapped in human features. There she is, the devoted mother. Right on schedule. Junseo raised his weapon, the barrel trained on Tae-wook's head with steady precision. His security team fanned out, creating a semicircle that trapped Tae-wook against the building's edge, but none of them fired. They couldn't, not with Mi-hai in his arms. Not with one wrong move sending her over the barrier into the void beyond. "Let her go, Tae-wook." Junseo's voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that preceded massacre. "This is between us. The child is innocent." "Innocent?" Tae-wook laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "This thing is an abomination, proof of your wife's betrayal and your blindness. She's diluted blood, corrupted lineage, everything our family has spent generations avoiding." He shifted his grip on Mi-hai, and the child whimpered. "I gave you 2 years to see the truth, to understand that she doesn't belong in our world. But you were too weak, too sentimental, so now I fix what you couldn't. You killed my wife." Junseo took a step forward, and immediately Tae-wook moved backward, closer to the edge, dangling Mi-hai further over the barrier. Junseo froze. "You murdered her to cover up your racism, your hatred. I eliminated a threat to our purity." Tae-wook's composure cracked, revealing the zealot beneath. She was going to confess, going to tell you about the surrogate, about the black woman whose egg contaminated our bloodline. She grew a conscience too late, and it would have destroyed everything. So yes, I set that fire, and I've been waiting ever since for the right moment to finish what I started. Courtney felt something snap inside her. Not break snap, like a tether being cut, like restraints falling away. She'd spent 3 weeks learning to navigate Junseo's world with caution, with strategy, playing a role and following rules she didn't understand. But there were no rules here. No strategy. Just her daughter dangling over death while a monster monologued about blood purity. She moved before anyone could stop her, stepping out from behind Junseo's protective stance and walking directly toward Tae-wook with empty hands raised. "You want to talk about contamination? About impurity?" Her voice carried across the rooftop, strong despite the terror clawing at her throat. "Look at yourself. You murdered your own family member. You're planning to murder a child. There's nothing pure about you, Tae-wook. You're just a coward hiding behind ideology because you're terrified of becoming irrelevant." Tae-wook's eyes narrowed. "Stay back or I drop her right now." "No, you won't." Courtney kept walking, kept closing the distance. "Because then your statement doesn't work. You need this to look like an accident, remember? A tragedy during the blackout. But if you drop her while we're all watching, while Junseo's men have their weapons trained on you, you're just a murderer. And even in your twisted world, child killers don't get to walk away." She was 10 feet away now. Close enough to see the uncertainty flicker across Tae-wook's face. Close enough to see Mi-hai's small body trembling, her daughter's eyes locked on hers with desperate hope. "Courtney, stop." Junseo's voice was strained. "Don't, Junseo." She didn't look away from Tae-wook. "Put down your gun." "What?" The word came out strangled. "Put down your gun." She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. "He wants leverage. He wants to feel powerful. So give him what he wants. Give him the illusion of control while I get close enough to take my daughter back." For a moment, Junseo didn't move. Then, with visible reluctance, he lowered his weapon and placed it on the concrete. His security team shifted uncomfortably, but he raised a hand, forestalling their protests. Tae-wook's smile returned, vicious and triumphant. "Smart woman. You see? This is what weakness looks like, cousin. You disarm yourself for a mongrel child and a woman you've known for 3 weeks. Pathetic. Maybe, Courtney said softly. She was 5 feet away now. Or maybe it's what strength looks like. The strength to value life over pride. To choose love over purity. To be human instead of a monster. She lunged. Everything happened in compressed time seconds that felt like hours. Movement that felt like slow motion but happened too fast to prevent. Courtney's hands reached for Mihai, and Taewook reacted exactly as she'd gambled he would. He jerked backward, trying to pull the child out of reach, but his foot caught on the raised edge of the safety barrier. He stumbled, started to fall, and in that moment of lost balance, his grip on Mihai loosened. The child slipped from his arms. Courtney watched her daughter drop toward the barrier's edge in terrible clarity. She watched Mihai's small hands grasp at nothing. Watched her mouth open in a scream that the wind stole away. Watched her start to disappear over the ledge into 7 stories of empty air. Courtney didn't think. Didn't calculate odds or consider consequences. She just dove. Her body hit concrete hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. Her hands shot out, reaching, grasping, and miracle of miracles connected with Mihai's wrist, just as the child went over the edge. The sudden weight jerked Courtney forward, her body sliding across concrete, her torso hanging over the barrier now, nothing but her hips and legs still on the roof. Mihai dangled in space, held only by Courtney's desperate grip. The child's face was white with terror, her free hand clawing at air, her legs kicking uselessly above the courtyard far below where tiny figures were starting to gather and point upward. "Mama," Mihai's voice was thin, breaking. "Mama, don't let go." "Never," Courtney gasped. Her shoulder was screaming, the joint threatening to dislocate from supporting Mihai's full weight. Her fingers were slipping sweat and blood, making Mihai's small wrist treacherous to hold. "I've got you, baby. I've got—" Her grip slipped. Mihai dropped an inch, and Courtney's scream tore from her throat as she lunged further over the edge, catching the child with both hands now, but losing more of her own purchase on the roof. Her hips were sliding. In seconds, they'd both go over. Then Junso was there. He grabbed Courtney around the waist with bruising force, his other hand reaching down to grasp Mihai's arm. Together, they hauled the child up, inch by agonizing inch, until Mihai cleared the barrier and collapsed onto the concrete, sobbing into Courtney's chest. Junso pulled Courtney back from the edge, and for a moment, the 3 of them simply held each other, shaking, breathing, alive. Taewook had regained his balance during their rescue. He stood 5 feet away, calculating, his eyes darting between Junseo's security team and the roof access door, searching for an escape that didn't exist. "It's over," Junso said, standing slowly, placing himself between Taewook and his family. "You failed. Mihai is safe. And now every person in that building knows you tried to murder a child." "She's not a child," Taewook spat. "She's a mistake. A stain that— She's my daughter." Junseo's voice was quiet. Final. "And you touched her." He moved with liquid speed, crossing the distance between them before Taewook could react. His hand shot out, gripping Taewook's collar, and he dragged his cousin toward the edge of the roof. Taewook struggled, but Junso was beyond rage now. He was something colder, more deliberate. "You wanted to talk about purity?" Junseo said conversationally, holding Taewook at the barrier's edge. "Let me tell you what's pure, the love I have for my daughter, the fury I feel when someone threatens her. This—" He shoved Taewook back, releasing him. Taewook teetered on the edge, arms windmilling, his face twisted with terror, the same terror he'd inflicted on a 2-year-old child. Junso's foot came up, one precise kick to the center of Taewook's chest, and the man who'd called Mihai an abomination fell screaming into the soul night. Courtney risked everything to save her daughter. That is a mother's love. If you were on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Comment Supermom for Courtney. 3 days after Taewook's body was scraped off the museum courtyard, Courtney sat in Junso's private study while he cleaned the cuts on her palms with careful precision. Her hands were a mess rope burns from where she'd gripped the barrier's edge, deep abrasions where concrete had torn skin, bruises blooming purple and green across her knuckles. They hurt less than they should have, probably because her body was still flooded with adrenaline that hadn't fully dissipated, still braced for threats that no longer existed. The official story had been crafted with surgical precision. Tae-wook, distraught over recent syndicate conflicts, had suffered a mental breakdown during the gala's blackout. He'd taken Mi-hai to the roof in a confused state, and when confronted, had tragically fallen while struggling with security. Witnesses had been paid or persuaded. Police reports had been filed and filed away. The medical examiner's verdict was suicide while the balance of mind was disturbed. No charges filed. Case closed. Seoul's underworld knew better, of course. They knew what happened when you threatened the Golden Dragon's family. They knew what Junseo was capable of when pushed past the edge of restraint. And they knew that the new Mrs. Han, the American, the outsider, the woman who dove over a building's edge to save her daughter, was not to be underestimated. Mi-hai was asleep upstairs. Finally, after 2 days of nightmares and clinging that neither Courtney nor Junseo had discouraged. The cut above her eyebrow had required 3 stitches, administered by Dr. Yoon in the estate's medical suite while Courtney held her and sang lullabies in a voice that kept breaking. The physical wound would heal cleanly. The psychological ones would take longer. But the child psychologist Junseo had flown in from Tokyo, said Mi-hai's prognosis was good. She was talking now, really talking, in full sentences and questions and observations that tumbled out like she was making up for lost time. She was asking about her mother who'd died, about the woman who was her mama now, about why some people were mean and whether the bad man was really gone forever. Junseo had answered with more honesty than Courtney expected. Yes, the bad man was gone. No, he couldn't hurt anyone anymore. And yes, sometimes people were mean because they were scared of things they didn't understand. But that was their weakness, not yours. Now, in the quiet of the study, with the city lights glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows, Junseo wrapped Courtney's right hand in white gauze with the careful attention of someone performing a sacred ritual. His own hands bore their own marked split knuckles, a burn across his forearm from where he'd grabbed a steam pipe in the chaos, bruises that suggested he'd had his own confrontations during the blackout that he hadn't mentioned. "You should have let me fall," Courtney said quietly. "When I went over that edge, you could have saved Mi-hai and let me go. It would have been cleaner. One less complication in your life." Junseo's hands stilled. He looked up at her with eyes that had shadows she was learning to read. "Is that what you think you are? A complication? Aren't I?" She tried to pull her hand away, but he held firm. This was supposed to be temporary, strategic. A marriage of convenience to protect Mi-hai from Tae-wook. Well, Tae-wook is dead. The threat is neutralized. So the arrangement is over. Junseo released her hand and stood abruptly, moving to his desk. He unlocked a drawer and withdrew a document, the marriage contract they'd both signed 4 weeks ago, with its clauses about duration and termination and conditions for dissolution. He held it up so she could see it, then methodically tore it in half, then quarters, then kept tearing until the pieces were confetti in his hands. "There, no more contract." Courtney's heart hammered against her ribs. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done weeks ago." He let the pieces fall like snow onto his desk. "I'm tearing up the lie we've been telling ourselves, that this was purely strategic, that we were playing roles, that we could walk away when it was convenient. Junseo, I watched you dive off a building for our daughter." His voice was rough, stripped of its usual control. "I watched you confront Tae-wook with nothing but words as weapons. I watched you stand in front of Seoul's criminal elite and refuse to be intimidated. And somewhere in the last 3 weeks, I stopped seeing you as a necessary complication and started seeing you as..." He stopped, his jaw working. "As what?" Courtney stood, her bandaged hands forgotten, her entire focus on this man who'd kidnapped her and married her, and somehow become essential to her in ways she was terrified to examine. "As mine." The word came out fierce, possessive, vulnerable. "As Mi-hai's mother and my partner and the woman I wake up thinking about. As someone I can't imagine this house without. This life without." He crossed back to her, his hands cupping her face with unexpected gentleness. "I don't want a contract marriage anymore, Courtney. I don't want strategy and convenience and an exit clause. I want real, messy, complicated. Whatever this is between us that terrifies me and makes me feel alive for the first time in years." Tears burned Courtney's eyes. "You kidnapped me. You forced me into this." "I know. And I would apologize, except that apologies feel insufficient for what I did. You should hate me. You have every right to walk away the moment these bandages come off. His thumbs brushed over her cheekbones, catching tears she hadn't realized were falling. But I'm begging you to stay anyway. Not because of contracts or threats or obligations, but because somewhere in this disaster, we became a family. A real one. And I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. I'm still angry, Courtney whispered. At your dead wife for stealing my daughter. At the clinic for lying. At you for dragging me into this world without my consent. At myself for... Her voice broke. For falling for you anyway despite all of it. Junso's expression cracked open, revealing something raw and real beneath the armor. Then be angry. Scream at me. Hate me when you need to. But do it here. Do it while we raise Mihai together. Do it while we figure out what the hell we're building from all this wreckage. It won't be easy, Courtney said, even as her hands came up to cover his, even as she leaned into his touch. I don't fit in your world. The syndicate will always see me as an outsider. There will be more Taewook's people who look at Mihai and see something wrong instead of something miraculous. Then we'll deal with them together. Junso's forehead touched hers, and the intimacy of it stole her breath. You and me and our daughter. A family that doesn't apologize for existing. Our daughter, Courtney repeated, testing the words. Not mine or yours. Ours. Ours, Junso confirmed. From the moment you carried her, from the moment I held her, from the moment she reached for you and said mama, and shattered both our lives into something better. When he kissed her, it wasn't the almost kiss from weeks ago, hesitant and interrupted. This was certain, claiming. A promise sealed with touch and breath and the kind of desperate need that came from nearly losing everything. Courtney kissed him back with equal ferocity, pouring 2 years of grief and 3 weeks of terror, and a lifetime's worth of longing into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Junseo smiled a real smile. Not the cold calculation he showed the world, but something genuine and almost boyish. Stay, he said simply. Please. I'm staying, Courtney whispered. Not because you asked, because I choose to. For Mihai, for us, for whatever we're becoming. The next morning, Courtney woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd left uncurtained and the sound of laughter from downstairs. She found Junso in the kitchen, actually in the kitchen, not the formal dining room, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt that made him look almost normal, almost like someone who didn't run a criminal empire. He was making pancakes with comical incompetence while Mihai sat on the counter, offering unhelpful advice and stealing chocolate chips from the bowl. Appa, you're supposed to flip it when it bubbles. See? Bubbles. Mihai pointed with her small bandaged finger, the stitches above her eyebrow hidden beneath a cartoon bandage she'd insisted on. Mama makes much better pancakes. She lets me put faces on them with the chocolate. Traitor, Junso said, but he was smiling. I'm trying my best here. Your best is burning, Courtney said from the doorway, and both of them turned to look at her daughter, and her husband, her impossible family that had been stolen and found and fought for. Mihai's face lit up like sunrise. Mama, come fix Appa's pancakes, he needs help. Courtney crossed the kitchen and slipped into the space beside Junso, fitting against his side like she'd always belonged there. She took the spatula from his hands and salvaged the burning pancake while Mihai provided running commentary, and Junso pressed a kiss to her temple that felt like coming home. They ate breakfast at the kitchen island, the three of them, while Mihai chattered about her dreams and asked if they could get a puppy, and announced that she wanted to be a doctor when she grew up so she could help people like Dr. Yoon helped her. Junso listened with the same intensity he brought to syndicate negotiations. And Courtney felt something settle in her chest, not the phantom ache she'd carried for 2 years, but its opposite. Fullness. Completion. The sense that after years of being fractured, she'd finally become whole. I love you, Mama, Mihai said suddenly, chocolate smeared across her chin. And I love you, Appa. And I love our family. Even when it's messy. Especially when it's messy, Junso corrected gently. Courtney looked at them, at the man who'd become her partner, at the daughter she'd never stopped grieving, and felt tears blur her vision for the 100th time in 3 days. But these were different tears. Not grief or terror or rage, but something simpler. Joy. I love you too, she whispered. Both of you. So much it scares me. Good, Junseo said, his hand finding hers under the table, his thumb brushing over the sapphire ring she'd never taken off. Fear means it matters. Means we're fighting for something real. And as morning light filled the kitchen, and Mihai asked for seconds, and Junseo attempted to pour orange juice with disastrous results, Courtney realized that this chaotic, imperfect, hard-won family was exactly what she'd been searching for all along. Not the fantasy of what family should be, but the reality of what it could become when people chose each other despite impossible odds. They were scarred and messy and built from wreckage, but they were real, and they were hers.